everybody. I am so glad to welcome you to this afternoon's Glenbard Parent Series event. My name is Gilda Ross. I'm the Glenbard Student and Community Projects Coordinator. This is the 25th year of the Glenbard Parent Series that's coming to a close, and it's a good chance to thank all of the annual sponsors who helped make this possible. Thank you for coming here and joining us. And your homework, as I always like to say, is to please share the resource. If you are on Facebook or Instagram, please let everybody know that we are here and that everyone is always welcome to these free Glenbard Parent Series events. One more program to go, one more speaker to go. Tonight, I hope you will all come back and spread the word about the 7 p.m. program. As you can see, tonight we'll be talking about mindfulness, use your breathing to transform stress into strength. And then Jessica Leahy, who is the author of The Gift of Failure, will be with us on Tuesday, May 4th at 7 p.m. and another noon program on Wednesday, May 5th. Jessica writes very honestly about her own struggles with addiction, and the mission in this book, Addiction Inoculation, was to spare her children the challenges of addiction. And it should be a very interesting program, and that will finish up the year. We do have our lineup all set. I hope you will go to the Glenbard Parent Series website, glenbardgps.org, and check us out. And the sun is shining, yay! It's gonna be a great day. And I'm so excited to welcome Matt here to the Glenbard Parent Series. For almost 2 decades, Matt Dewar has served as a coach, educator, and well-being coordinator at Lake Forest High School, introducing students, athletes, and colleagues to research-based mindfulness and self-care through workshops, academic courses, school-wide programs, and professional development. Outside of Lake Forest High School, Matt has worked with collegiate and professional athletes and consulted with school districts nationally on implementing mindfulness and well-being programming. He's also the former president of the Coalition of Schools Educating Mindfully, one of our co-sponsors of this event, and the author of the Mindful Breathing Workbook for Teens that just came out 2021. Ontological inquiry. Did I say that right, Matt? His work has been featured on TEDx, NPR, and the National Wellness Institute. In this 25th year, we brought back some of our favorites, and it was also a special excitement on my part to welcome someone local, someone who is in the schools, who can really provide us some hands-on tools that we can use at this very challenging time. So I'm just delighted, Matt, that you are here. Take it away.
Thank you, Gilda. Sorry, I'm getting a bunch of things popping up on my screen here. Let me share my screen here for a moment. Okay, I think you should all be able to see my screen. I want to thank Gilda, who's awesome. We've been talking for a year, a little over a year, about this presentation. And so here we are, a year into it, and it's coming to fruition. I also really want to thank the amazing Tracy Heilers, who is the founder of the Coalition of Schools Educating Mindfully, who's an amazing human being and who is just awesome. And the Coalition is an awesome organization. And if you don't know anything about it, go look it up right now. I believe it's edmindfully or educatingmindfully.org or edmindfully.org. I should know that. But just Google the Coalition of Schools Educating Mindfully. It's a phenomenal organization, and Tracy's amazing. So here we are. I'm really happy to be here. I'm Matt Dewar, as Gilda said, and I've been at Lake Forest High School for 18 years. Next year will be my 19th year as an English teacher and as a wellness teacher, as a coach in a number of sports, and as the well-being coordinator, which is involved creating a school-wide mindfulness program for both students and staff. And my latest role is a social and emotional learning instructional coach, where I help colleagues think about more skillfully integrating SEL into curriculum, into instruction, and into the classroom environment. And so I've been at this work for a very long time. Today, we don't have a lot of time. We only have 1 hour. And so we're really just going to scratch the surface. There are a number of topics that we're just going to kind of pass over that we could spend day-long workshops on. I look at today in this hour as basically a sampler. You go to the grocery store, they got some guac and chips. You got a chip, you got some guac, you can taste it and get a sense of whether or not it's a product you want to pursue further. And so that's what today is. I'm introducing a topic that hopefully you will become interested in and want to learn more about. And as a result of just having a finite amount of time, I tend to be a big picture person. I think it's something that we often lack in the world of education. We get so stuck in problem solving mode that we forget that maybe the biggest problem is being stuck in problem solving mode, and that it's really important to be able to untether ourselves from the immediacy of putting out fires on a day-to-day basis and seeing the bigger picture. And so this really gets at the why of education and the whole educational enterprise. Why are we doing this work? Right? We don't ask this question enough. And it's because our profession is very stressful. It's because our profession is the perfect recipe for burnout, because it entails high emotional investment coupled with many outcomes that are completely out of our control and many circumstances that are completely out of our control. And that's a recipe for burnout and emotional distress, is when you are deeply, deeply emotionally invested, and the things that you're invested in, often you have very little control as to how they turn out or unfold over time. And so it really is important as educators for us to pump the brakes every now and then and step back and ask, why are we doing this? And the first time I really did this was about 10 years ago, where I walked into a classroom, and that classroom was filled with 21 freshmen students who had just received word that their dear friend had walked across the front lawn of the school and put himself down in front of a train. And this was one of 3 incidents that unfolded in a month and a half in a very eerily similar fashion, where we had 3 students within a mile of train tracks take their own lives. And so during this time, I began to question. I was in the beginning of my doctoral program. What actually matters in education? What actually matters about the work that we do? Because it's entirely possible that we can check off all the boxes on the rubric of academic achievement and learning and curriculum and instruction. And that still doesn't mean that our students wake up in the morning and are ready to live healthy emotional lives, or even want to live their lives. And so it's really important to remember that context for our work. And so, sorry, I got to move my, is there any way I can make this, there we go, move that off to the side. Sorry about that. And so what actually matters, in my opinion, is emotional well-being, the emotional well-being of teachers, the emotional well-being of students, because it's really hard to envision any outcome in life that's worthwhile without emotional well-being. Think about it. What is an outcome in education or in life that's worthwhile on its own, divorced from emotional well-being, right? It's almost impossible to think of any outcome. And so emotional well-being in many ways is the only thing we pursue as an end in itself, right? We pursue education as a means to sometimes getting employment and on and on and on. But emotional well-being, we don't pursue necessarily as a means to anything else. It is what we want. It is the end. We want lives of emotional fulfillment and well-being. in light of that, it's disturbing to see the trend for young adult mental health and emotional well-being in our schools, in our country, and across the world. Things are not trending in the right direction. And it's really important to recognize and remember that children and young adults live in a world adults created. So we need to stop talking about the young adult mental health epidemic and start talking about the adult mental health epidemic, because children and young adults live in our world. And to some extent, they're the canary in the coal mine. If they're not well, it's because we're not well. And so we need to start looking in the mirror as adults, as coaches, as parents, as educators, as mentors. We need to look in the mirror, and we need to stop looking directly at young adult emotional well-being and looking to import all sorts of solutions. And we really need to start looking at our own practices and our own emotional well-being, because a young adults see how we are. This happens all the time. And if educators are here right now watching this, you definitely can identify, or if you're a parent, you can identify. I've walked into class, I don't know how many times throughout the course of my career. I tend to be a pretty optimistic, upbeat, energetic teacher. And there are times where I don't feel that way. And I walk into class and I think I'm doing my best to present a version of myself that is entirely consistent with how I always am. And I'll have a student say, "Mr. D, what's up?" I'll say, "What do you mean, what's up?" I'll say, "What's up? What do you mean? What's up? Something's weird. What's going on? Are you mad? Are you mad about something?" Right? They see how we are. They're adapted to us. They can read our cues. They know where our emotional ebbs and flows are. Whether we think we're successfully concealing them or not, they can see right through us. And this is concerning because it's probably 7 or 8 years ago now that the CDC started saying that the United States was the only first world country with a declining life expectancy. And so they looked into some of the stats on the major culprits of disease, heart disease, and diabetes, and Alzheimer's, cancers, et cetera. And none of the numbers were making sense in terms of explaining why we had a declining life expectancy. So they put together a team of researchers, and they found that people in middle age were dying at an unprecedented rate. And they realized that they were dying from 3 statistical categories: alcohol-related deaths, drug-related deaths, 2/3 of which were opioid-related, and then ultimately death by suicide, which from 1999 to 2017, I believe, suicide rate in the United States from 12 up was up 34%. And in, I believe, 10 different states, it was up 50%. And so we're living in a world with a lot of dysregulated adults. We're living in a world where we don't have an awareness of the fact that our worst habits are unskillful attempts to self-regulate. And often these habits are playing out in real time. This emotion dysregulation is playing out in real time in our classrooms, in our schools, and in our homes. And here's the thing, it's instructive. It's contagious. And that's because we know from the research on emotional intelligence that the person in any situation, a classroom, basketball court, a football field, at home, in a corporate setting, doesn't matter the age group, in any situation, the person of influence establishes the emotional tone and climate. And I like to use the analogy sometimes of pendulum clocks. 400 years ago, Christian Huygens invented the pendulum clock. And he also discovered something that has perplexed physicists to this very day, which is If you put multiple pendulum clocks on the same wall, they eventually sync to the same cadence. And so we can use this as an analogy for the emotional life of a particular group, whether it's a classroom, a team, a family, a corporate team. Is the person of influence in that situation is the master pendulum, the master emotional pendulum. And if their emotional cadence is dysregulated, all the other emotional pendulums in that room are going to calibrate to that. This is simply a law of physiology, a law of nature, a law of neurobiology. Some of you might be familiar with the work of Stephen Porges, who calls this phenomenon neuroception, the ability of our nervous systems to unconsciously read the emotional attunement of other people. And when we do that and we feel that that person has influence or power over us, we start tuning our emotional lives to their emotional status. This is not a cognitive thing. This is not a conscious thing. This is a very, very, very old ancient mechanism. Some of you might be familiar with the work of Stuart Shankar in self-regulation. He calls this same phenomenon interbrain, right? Our brains are interwoven. They're reading. But the job of my brain fundamentally from a social standpoint is to read the intentions and status of other brains around me. And so we're doing this constantly. And so what does this mean for education? It means you don't just teach the lesson. You are the lesson. Let me say that again. You don't just teach the lesson. You are the lesson, whether you like it or not. And I've heard a number of teachers in doing my work, I've had a number of teachers just say, I signed up for this job to teach history. I signed up to teach math. I'm a math teacher, I'm not a social worker. Okay, point taken. But you're fundamentally a human being, and your students are human beings. And we have ancient physiological mechanisms at work within all of us that are unconsciously dictating and calibrating our inner emotional experience. And if that inner emotional experience is dysregulated, the whole purpose of the learning enterprise is then eclipsed, because we know you can't learn if you're emotionally dysregulated. And often you'll see teachers, and I'm not trying to pick on teachers. I love teachers. I am a teacher. I'm still in the classroom. Just 10 minutes before this presentation, I was teaching my senior philosophy class. But too often teachers who complain about disruptive students and neglectful students lack the self-awareness to realize that the way in which they comport themselves in an instructional space is dysregulating, and that's picked up by some students who are more prone to dysregulation because of the backgrounds they bring with them as they come into the classroom. And so how we are is more influential than what we say. How we are is more influential than what we say. Fundamentally, as teachers, as educators, we're a presence before anything else, before textbooks, before lesson plans, before assessments. We are a presence, a living, breathing presence. And the quality of that presence is, it drives everything that happens experientially in that particular educational space, whether you're a social worker, a counselor, a teacher, so on and so forth. And so an essential question here is, am I a regulating presence, right? I mean, as I started becoming more familiar with this work, it immediately made me self-conscious, which is good because it's making me more self-aware. How do I dysregulate my students without realizing it? How am I a dysregulating presence? And what are the things that I do that allows my presence to be regulating? And so here's just a simple reflection, and we'll just do this first activity together. Is, can I be still and quiet and just breathe for 5 minutes? We won't do this for 5 minutes because we don't have the time, but let's do it for 1 minute. Let's sit, be still, be quiet, and just breathe for 1 minute. Okay? So feet flat on the floor. If you can, sit up straight in whatever chair you're in. Straight doesn't mean you have to be tense and rigid. Just your shoulders over your hips, your ears over your shoulders. Posture that is attentive but not tense. Put your hands on your lap, or you can fold them as long as they don't fidget and move. Close your mouth. Breathe through your nose. If you want to close your eyes, close your eyes. And I'm going to stop talking. And all you need to do is be still, is be quiet, and just simply observe your breathing. That's it. 1 minute. Ready, set, go. On the count of 3, take a long, slow breath in through your nose. Then you're going to hold it. I'll count to 5. Then you'll slowly exhale through your mouth. 1, 2, 3. Slowly breathe in through your nose. And just keep going till you fill up all the way. And then once you're full, hold it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Slowly exhale through your mouth. As you do that, let go of any tension in your shoulders and your body. Just feel your body soften and gently sink as you exhale. You can wiggle your toes a little bit, wiggle your fingers, do a couple shoulder rolls, slowly open your eyes, and we're back. If you struggle to experience yourself directly, how are you going to be a regulating presence? How did it feel to be still and quiet and just breathe? Were you crawling out of your skin? Did it feel terribly uncomfortable to be in your own body? The thing about stillness and quiet is it allows us to confront the conditioning of our nervous systems. We get to see the underlying activity and noise that is driving so much of our habitual thinking and feeling and behavior. And often what we do on a day-to-day basis is we have all this noise going on internally. And what we do is we just create external noise to match it. And when it matches it, it blends it out, right? It evens it out. So you think you're calm, you think you're functioning. But the moment that external noise is taken away, that internal noise just keeps going. And where's the off switch? It's a cultural phenomenon. Most of us at night get very tired but wired, have a hard time falling asleep and staying asleep. Why? Because the activity of the day is over, but our internal engine and its RPMs are still revving. So why is it so important to realize this? Well, it's important because that's what's going on. That's what's being communicated. It's some fundamental level. You can't think that this tempest of activity within yourself is unfolding And it's not influencing your relationships and your interactions, especially if you're in a role of mentorship or parenting or teaching or coaching. So am I a regulating presence? Step one is learn to be still and quiet with yourself and find comfort there. Learn to confront the conditioning of your nervous system and interrupt it, right? So one of the signs of a healthy nervous system is this ability to move from high states of arousal and stress to calm. Just earlier today, I have 2 golden retrievers, sound asleep. Someone came to the door, hooked something on the door, advertisement thing right on the door handle outside. They heard the click. They went from sleeping up, barking at the window, saliva and stuff all over the front window. Within 30 seconds, they're back to where they were sleeping. And within 1 minute, they're back asleep. They have this ability to move through all the different possibilities of the nervous system like that. But we're stuck at one end, right? So I'm rambling here. I'm taking too much time, but you get the idea. This is an important idea. This is fundamental work when we talk about emotional intelligence and skill and self-awareness and self-regulation. It starts there. An awareness of what is my emotional engine doing? And do I have any tools to interact with that skillfully? Inside out tools, not outside in tools. Another cultural norm, right? We use alcohol to bring ourselves down. We use caffeine to bring ourselves up. That's not a skill. I digress. So where do we start? We start with mindful breathing. Been doing SEL work for a long time and all over, and school districts are so quick to spend so much money importing problems with the hope of importing solutions with the hope of exporting their SEL problems. And so they adopt huge programs and do all this stuff. All that's well-intentioned and great, but let's just start small. Let's start with mindful breathing. And why? It's always available and accessible. There are very few barriers to entry, to access. I always say to my students, as we start a breathing activity, raise your hand if you forgot your breathing at home, right? Raise your hand if you forgot your breathing in the last class. It's always with you. It's fundamental to your being. Breathing is easy to learn, and there's a reason why we can learn how to breathe. It's a behavior. It's not just a reflexive action like it is in every other breathing thing on the planet, where breathing and respiration are the same. But in human beings, we can disassociate breathing from respiration. And we can do that as an advantage, as an adaptive thing, but we can also do it unconsciously and learn maladaptive breathing behaviors. So it's easy to learn. And there's a reason why we've developed this ability to consciously control our breathing muscle, the diaphragm, and take control of our breathing. It helps us act more skillfully on our environment. It helps us control our internal environment more skillfully as well. Breathing is directly connected to our physiology. Your body's number one goal is to breathe. It's your first line of defense against stress. You can go months without food. You can go days without water. You can go minutes without air. Breathing is fundamental. It is directly connected to your physiology in real time. And here's the best part. It's free. You don't have to pay anything for your breathing. So before we all go run out and spend all this money on huge programs, which again, it's not a bad thing, but start with simple things, powerful tools that yield significant results and have low to no cost. So mindfully breathing together is an opportunity to co-regulate. And this is what nature intended. You see the infant, you see the mother. We know infants regulate their breathing. The nervous system of the infant regulates its breathing to match the breathing pattern of the mother. And we know now, going back to the person of influence in any situation, we know that people unconsciously mirror the breathing patterns of people who have power over them or influence over them. So this is a human phenomenon. Again, our nervous system is constantly calibrating, looking for social harmony. Breathing is a behavior that expresses the state of our nervous system. A couple summers ago at Stanford, the Krasnow lab, they finally identified the shared pathway of neurons between the emotional centers of the brain and the respiratory centers of the brain, which means what we long have known was confirmed, that at every moment, our emotions, the state of our nervous system is expressed in our breathing pattern. But more importantly, the relationship's bidirectional, meaning you can then consciously change your breathing to work backwards to control your internal state. That is the real powerful piece. So when we talk about emotional intelligence, we talk about self-awareness and self-regulation. Breathing can help us achieve both. You observe your breathing as a way of becoming self-aware, as a way of understanding where your emotions are calibrated in a given moment. And then once you understand where your emotions are, you can change your breathing in real time like a gear shifter and move your emotions back into the zone of regulation, that optimal middle point. So how we breathe can be a regulating or dysregulating force. How we breathe shapes how we speak. You can hear it in people's voices. I've been doing this work long enough where in working with colleagues or people, I can hear emotional distress in their voice, and I can hear dysregulated breathing in the sound of someone's voice. And sometimes I'll just simply recommend, hey, take a moment, pause, close your mouth, breathe through your nose, and just slow your breathing down, right? How we hold our bodies reveals how we breathe. How others perceive us, whether we're safe or not safe, is shaped by our breathing patterns. And again, we're consciously attuned to this. So what does this look like in a classroom? We're halfway through our hour. Let's look at some practical strategies. And I always say this, the methods are many, the principles are few. There's 8 million ways that you can mess with your breathing. Just go onto YouTube, go onto the internet. There are 8 million different exercises for breathing and supposedly changing your state to this or that or whatever. What I want to focus on are a few methods that I think are really simple and useful, but also the principles, because if you understand the principles, you can then have more fluency with the various methods and pick methods that ultimately serve what your goals are. So mindful breathing principles are just really simple. Be still, be quiet, pay attention to your experience. You've achieved 90% of the positive outcomes if you can start doing that. If in your respective classroom, or if you're a social worker working with a student, helping people come together in a communal way to feel safe, being still, being quiet, and paying attention to experience, right? If you can just integrate those basic principles, you've already done so much. There's so much positive regulation going on there. And you have to understand, and again, this could be a whole presentation in itself, that not everyone is ready to be still and to be quiet and to pay attention to their experience closely. And this is where trauma comes in, that being still and being quiet can be hard for people who have experienced trauma, especially students, that stillness and quiet is actually, instead of it being restorative, it's threatening. And so that's something to be mindful of. It doesn't mean don't do it. It just means you have to be very skillful in how you bring someone slowly into that space, almost like someone getting into a cold pool, right? Some students can jump right in and they love it, right in the deep end. And they soak up the stillness and quiet, and they're just ready. Other students need to use the steps, and maybe they'll just hang out on the first step for months or the whole year. And that's fine, right? But just being aware of that. So the first technique that I use in the classroom is just what I call self-awareness breathing. And we're all familiar probably with Dan Siegel's notion of the window of tolerance or the zone of regulation, where we have hyperarousal in the red, usually characterized as anxiety, but a high emotional state. And then we have the blue state below, where we're shutting down, becoming numb, maybe depressed. And the window of tolerance or the zone of regulation is in the middle. And that's typically where we want to be, right? That's where we feel most like ourselves. That's where we feel most equipped to deal with the ups and downs of life. It's where we're able to most access our ability to learn and grow and adapt and evolve and be creative. So we want to spend time there. And so in this initial breathing exercise, I share a more rudimentary form of this particular visual with them. And then I layer this number continuum over it. And I tell my students, and this is usually how we start class, and we did this even remotely throughout the year, right? So you don't have to be in person. So on a scale of 0 to 10, 10 being highest level of agitation, anxiety, and stress you can think of. An analogy you can use is the stress bucket. Your stress bucket is absolutely full. A single drop into it will make it overflow. That's a 10. 0 is you're sound asleep. 5 is calm and alert. That perfect middle ground where your nervous system is totally balanced. You have energy, but not too much. Enough energy and enough relaxation. Where are you on this scale right now? Right? So let's take a moment. Let's practice it and not just talk about it. So again, sit up straight. Take a moment to be still, to be quiet, and to slowly shift your attention to your breathing and your body as a whole. Because of course your whole body is breathing. Your breath and body are not two things. So feel your body breathe. And as you do that, what score would you give yourself right now? What are your breath and body communicating to you right now about your internal state? I would say right now, I'm at a 7. So let's say your student says to you, I'm at a 7. Or let's say my student says to me, I'm at a 7. I'll just say to the student, how do you know you're at a 7? Which seems like a very confusing question, right? Like, what do you mean? How do I know? I just know. Well, you made that assessment based on information. What information did you use to determine you were at a 7? Long story short, they start to realize that the breath is a sensation of the body. And the body has other sensations in addition to the breath that are always unconscious in our unconscious awareness. It's always being communicated where our state is at. So you know you're at a 7, but you don't realize you're assigning a 7 because of certain qualities. So I said I was at a 7. How do I know that I'm at a 7? Based on what information? I can feel my breathing is higher up than it usually is. And it's because I'm talking a lot and I'm talking fast and I keep looking at the clock in the corner of my eye. And I know that this presentation is going to go longer than an hour because I always end up talking too much. And so slowly my anxiety level is going up. And I feel that as my breath migrating up into my lower chest. And that corresponds with a sense of tightness in that area. I also feel some tightness in my shoulders and between my shoulder blades. I also feel that my exhalations are being prematurely ended. So I have this kind of background sense of air hunger. I'm not allowing myself to actually exhale all the way. And so then I'm pulling more air in, which is then again reinforcing a short exhalation. So I'm over breathing. And that probably then, is very much connected to that breath moving up. That's self-awareness. So if you came into my class, you would be able to see students talk like this about their internal state. All the wonderful things about emotional intelligence and social intelligence, none of them are possible without this basic skill. Interoception, the ability to read your internal state, the internal sensations of your body. And then what do they mean? Right? What does this mean for me right now? That's the next question. Where am I at? How do I know? And what does this mean for me? What means that I'm anxious? Does it? Does it have to mean that? Are you just used to assigning that value to it? Maybe it could just be tightness in the chest and that's it, without assigning the narrative of anxiety on it, right? So we could go on and on and on and break this down into like what factors contributed to this, right? For me, I'm giving a presentation, right? That's a huge factor. So self-awareness really begins with breath awareness. And breath awareness is an access point for more skillfully learning about our internal state in real time. So self-awareness breathing, if you just take away this and implement this alone, I mean, this is huge, right? This is the core skill of social and emotional intelligence, because the better you get at this, reading your own internal state, guess what you're also going to get better at? Reading other people's internal states, reading other people's breathing patterns. And sometimes you'll know what they're feeling before they know what they're feeling, which allows you to respond more compassionately to them because you're regulated and you're seeing that they're dysregulated. And you're not allowing their nervous system to hijack your nervous system and their breathing to hijack your breathing, so on and so forth. Another technique that you can use more as like a breathing assessment for stress. This is something I'll do at stressful times. Like if I'm working with students right before AP exams, where they're all very stressed out, or athletes before competition, is just do a 1 minute breath count. In 1 minute, how many times are you breathing? Right. This is a general assessment. You don't want to bank too much on this, but it's just a snapshot. It's a useful snapshot. If you're breathing a lot, it suggests your body's working hard to maintain balance. And the reason it's doing that is because there's underlying levels of ambient stress that are going on. And so if you can see how quickly you're, it's like the RPMs on your dashboard, right? How hard is your engine working? Well, if you're sitting still and you're quiet and you're breathing 25 seconds, 25 times, that shouldn't say seconds, it's just above 25 times is potentially problematic. If you're breathing up 25 breath cycles or more in a minute, your engine's working very hard. So typically 12 to 20 is considered quote unquote normal. 21 to 25 is elevated. And again, there are variations to this, and this doesn't necessarily mean you have dysregulated breathing. Some people just, their bodies breathe differently. But as general information, it can be helpful. And so if you want to bring your state down, what can you do? An exercise, reduce your 1 minute breath count by 50% for 1 to 5 minutes. So we do this in class. Say your timed score was 23. You were breathing, you had 23 breath cycles in 1 minute. Okay, well, let's follow that up with 3 minutes where you're consciously breathing 12 to 13 times a minute. Cut it in half, slow it down, balance the CO2 and oxygen in your blood. See what kind of effect that has on your internal emotional state. Often when I work with social workers, I often communicate that what we label as poor psychology is often mismanaged physiology. Another way of saying that is what we often label as anxiety is often just mismanaged physiology. We don't understand what's going on underneath the hood, so we're not managing it. We're like the driver in a car that's not shifting the gears properly because we don't know how to drive, right? And so you wouldn't look at the engine and be like, there's something wrong with the engine. No, you would look at the driver and say, let's figure out how to read the dashboard and read the RPMs so that you know when to shift, right? And I'm not reducing all mental illness or anxiety to mismanaged physiology, but a lot of it is. This is a really interesting test for, again, stress levels. This is usually something I'll do after the 1 minute breath test. I'm going forward here and I'm trying to go backwards. So the carbon dioxide tolerance test goes like this. I'm not going to have you do it. Sorry, I just had a pop up there. I was making sure Gilda wasn't sending me a question. Let me go back. How do I go back? Carbon dioxide tolerance test. This might be a little confusing and there isn't a ton of time left, but I'm going to do it anyways because I think it's important. So a carbon dioxide tolerance test, it goes like this. And again, you can follow up with me and I can explain these things more, provide a write-up. They're also in my workbook that's coming out this August, the Mindful Breathing Workbook. We'll get to that at the end, but I have this test in the workbook. A CO2 tolerance test goes like this. You just ask students to be still, be quiet, close their mouth, breathe through their nose for about a minute. So they just regulate their breathing. Then you ask them to take out their phone, pull up the stopwatch. They do that. Then you tell them when they're ready. After a normal exhalation through the nose, you're going to let that air out. You're going to pinch your nose, hold your breath, and start the timer. And you're going to time how long it takes for the air hunger reflex to kick in. So how quickly do you feel the urge to breathe and how distinct is it? Okay. So this is not an absolute breath hold time. It's not seeing how long you can hold your breath. You'll know that you did this test correctly if when you're done, you go back to a normal breathing pattern. If you finish this test and you're like, and you have to take a huge breath, you did it way too long, right? So when you do this, scores under 10 seconds show high stress. Shows a tolerance to carbon dioxide. And I'm not going to get lost in the weeds of the science behind this. I'll probably talk more about carbon dioxide and breathing and stress tonight, but I'm not going to do that here. But 0 to 10 seconds shows high stress. And any student that I've ever had or athlete that I've worked with who consistently has a score under 5 seconds, I have followed up with them and there has always been trauma. Let me say that again. Every time I've had a student or an athlete who consistently gets under 5 seconds. So basically the air comes out, they pinch their nose, they start their timer, and immediately they have to breathe. They feel like they're choking and they get a pain in their chest within 2 or 3 seconds. Every time I have followed up, there has been some underlying trauma or serious emotional distress, and sometimes asthma, severe asthma can have the same effect. So when I do this test in class, I teach a class sometimes called Wellness for Life with freshmen. This can be a wonderful way of gauging kids who are prone to emotional dysregulation and getting a read on their physiology, because here's the thing, your breath doesn't lie. Your breath will always tell you exactly where you're at. Your tolerance to carbon dioxide, it's fundamental to all the chemistry in your body. You can't fake it. So if someone's emotionally dysregulated, they tend to be dysregulated with CO2. And so this is a great way of identifying kids and getting them mental health supports, social work supports, in a context that's not invasive, where you have to talk about mental health and make people feel awkward sometimes talking about mental health, and right. And so I have connected a number of kids, athletes and students, with mental health supports who likely would have gone years and had all sorts of issues compounding academically and emotionally before they got help. And they were able to be connected with someone right away because I could identify it in dysregulated breathing in the classroom in real time. So this test is an invaluable test. 10 to 20 seconds is considered elevated stress. 20 to 30 seconds is normal. 30 to 40 is elevated capacity. Usually that's an endurance athlete. When I have swimmers in class or cross-country runners in class, they love to brag how long they can go, but that's just because they built up a tolerance to CO2 because their aerobic capacity is so high. And then above 40 seconds is someone who trains breath work. It's very hard to naturally be able to do this more than 40 seconds. We'll skip that because we have 9 minutes left. We'll skip that. This is an interesting exercise that I'll do in class, just working on mechanics, breathing behavior, the external part of breathing, right? Not the internal part. CO2 tolerance is more the chemistry of breathing. Breathing mechanics is more of the biomechanical view of breathing. So are you breathing as a structure properly, allowing your body to breathe and regulate itself? And so what does that mean? That means looking at the rib cage, because the breathing muscle, the diaphragm, is attached to the rib cage and the spine. So you want to know that your rib cage has optimal lateral movement, because if it does, your diaphragm then can move most efficiently and bring in more air, right? It's not impeded. And you have the phrenic nerve going from your diaphragm to your brain. And phrenic comes from the Greek phren, which means mind. So the people who named this nerve were very astute because of this relationship between the diaphragm and the mind, the emotional mind. That the primary breathing muscle, when it's regulated and doing its job efficiently, it's sending feedback to the brain that everything's under control. And the brain then can relax. It's all one big system. And when the brain becomes dysregulated, right, it's going to send signals down. It's an information highway, the phrenic nerve. It's going to send signals down and have the diaphragm start changing, right? So what's the exercise? I'll just have students place their hands on their ribs like this, right at the bottom of the rib cage. Close your mouth for 1 minute. Consciously breathe into through your nose, into the space between your hands. And as you do this, pay attention to your ribs. Are they moving laterally? Are you getting any rib movement in your lower ribs? Or is all your movement up here in the chest with all the accessory muscles, right? These muscles shouldn't be working hard when you breathe. If they are, it's suggesting that your rib cage, you probably have a tight thoracic spine where your rib cage attaches and your ribs don't have that lateral mobility. So just getting a read on how efficient of a breather are you from a mechanical standpoint. Just feeling your ribs. A lot of students actually love this one because you're touching the body, and just having your hands on your ribs and breathing, mentally breathing into that space helps a lot of students whose minds are otherwise restless. helps give them a kinesthetic and concrete cue to pay attention to as they start to breathe and practice breathing. It's the worst picture ever. Nasal breathing is another consideration. I watch students all the time in class, and I have this knack. Students will joke when I know that they haven't been getting good sleep, because I'll see them breathing through their mouths. And I'll say, you didn't get good sleep last night. And they'll say, how do you know that? And I can tell. I can tell by the way their mouth is just open. They're just blasting CO2 out. They're just sucking air in. And usually they have a posture that goes with that, that's just kind of collapsed, right? And so nasal breathing is really important. James Nestor wrote a wonderful book called Breathe. I think it came out this past summer, where he has a whole chapter on nasal breathing and different experiments that he did for the book with nasal breathing. It's really profound. So is mouth breathing your default respiratory mode? There is a correlation with mouth breathing and emotion dysregulation, that when we tend to be chronically emotionally dysregulated, we tend to breathe through our mouths and overbreathe and offload a lot of carbon dioxide, which makes us less tolerant to CO2. Do you mouth breathe while you sleep? This is a huge issue, especially with adults. I won't get into that now. We have 4 minutes left. I'm going to skip through all of this so we can get some questions. I love this analogy, and I use it with teachers. In flying, they talk about, you're a good pilot if you can fly by instrument. Because if the external conditions get bad and you can't visually see when you're a pilot, you're fine because you can navigate reading the dashboard of the plane. You can fly by instrument. And so the real benefit ultimately of learning to mindfully breathe is that you can teach yourself and students how to quote unquote fly by instrument in life. That sometimes we get into bad emotional weather and nothing is clear. Our cognitive perceptions are distorted. Our emotions are amiss and all over the place. But if we have our breathing, it's like having the instruments inside the cockpit of the plane. Everything else can be confusing and unclear. But if we can bring our attention to our breathing, we can still navigate successfully through that emotional fogginess and bad weather. And that can be life-saving, literally and figuratively. The ability to self-regulate in times where nothing else is clear. So as we conclude here, create a mindful breathing school culture. It's so simple. Start class with breathing together. End class with breathing together. Start faculty meetings with quiet and breathing. End faculty meetings, anything. Use breathing as a ritual to begin and or end experiences. Why? Because it brings us back to and reinforces the most important thing. We said at the beginning, why are we doing this? We're doing this because ultimately we want to be emotionally well. And we want our students to be emotionally well. And what's a really effective, cheap, always present tool to become emotionally well? Breathing. Mindful breathing. And so all we have to do is just build in opportunities to do that together. It's so powerful to do it together. So you know your own school culture better than I do, and you can figure out ways to integrate it in the most meaningful way. Viktor Frankl, this quote, actually, he didn't write, but it's attributed to him. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. Mindful breathing gives us freedom because it is that space. The one thing I say to students over and over again, and the one thing I'm going to say to you, and if it's the only thing you remember from today, if I can breathe, I can choose. It is that space when I can consciously bring my awareness to my breathing and my state. I've opened that space between stimulus and response, which means I can more skillfully respond to the world around me. Is there anything in life, any skill more important than the ability to do that? We see reactivity, emotional reactivity everywhere, and we see the deleterious consequences of emotional reactivity everywhere. If we can just teach this one skill, if I can breathe, I can choose who I will be and how I will respond. Nothing is more important than that. I'm going to end real quick with a passage from the workbook. This is at the beginning of the book. A note to caring adults. Co-regulation has become a buzzword in education and mental health. It refers to how your self-awareness and self-care skills synchronize with the emotional habits of the children and young adults you care for and oversee. The implications of this are significant. You teach and parent with who and how you are, more than with the content of what you say. Emotions are much, much older than words, and whether we like it or not, our young adults' inner lives set sail to our own emotional ebbs and flows. What this means is that we must do our own self-awareness and self-care work alongside our young adults. When they see us doing the work, they become aware of the possibility that the work can be done, that a healthy and stable emotional life is possible with practice. Just as importantly, they become aware through your choice to personally value and prioritize self-care, that it's significant and worth the commitment. I can't think of anything more instructive than demonstrating to young adults the capacity to struggle, adapt, and evolve toward greater emotional intelligence and freedom. So if we want emotionally skilled young adults, we have to practice and model emotional skill ourselves, and that can start with mindful breathing. That's it. We'll open it up to questions. You can contact me through my website or connect with me on Instagram or LinkedIn. I will stop sharing so I can see some faces, hopefully.
2 questions. You may not see faces, Matt.
Okay.
But the 2 questions, and thank you so much. That was great. I know that any parents that were listening in, and we definitely had parents listening in, they can extrapolate this in their home as well. And I know we'll focus more on that tonight at 7 o'clock. So anybody who's listening, please, again, Facebook, Instagram, share this, that tonight Matt will be back and we'll continue this conversation. So quick 2 questions, Matt. The first one was the masks and how do we do our mindful breathing with masks?
The masks are actually a wonderful opportunity and moment to start mindfully breathing, right? Because they're bringing attention to something we typically don't pay attention to, which is our breathing. Mm-hmm. So instead of being an obstacle to breathing, it's actually a wonderful moment because it's already bringing attention to our breathing. What has happened is that a lot of people have noticed that they start getting very panicky and they find themselves more prone to dysregulation when wearing a mask. And that's only because when you're wearing a mask, you're inhaling much more carbon dioxide than what you're used to. And what we know through research is that people who have panic disorder or a proclivity towards anxiety actually have an underlying sensitivity to carbon dioxide. So people who get panicky and feel very stressed out when they're wearing a mask, it's your physiology's way of communicating. It's almost like the check engine light on your car coming on, right? It's saying, hey, you need to pay attention to your stress. And so one of the things you can do is just be more skillful about wearing your mask in build how long successively you wear the mask, because you will build up the tolerance to CO2. Your body just has to adapt to it. So one of the things I've recommended to students who have had issues is, wear it till you start noticing those sensations coming on. And then if you can, find somewhere where you can take it off and kind of recalibrate, and then come back and put it on and just keep working like that. But in terms of just regular breathing exercises, you can still do it with masks on.
Okay, thank you. There was a question about dehydration. And it was sometimes when we're anxious, you know, the role of dehydration in this, in the stress.
For sure. I mean, you know, not just dehydration, we could start pointing to a variety of factors that point to our ability to self-regulate, having enough water, having the right kind of food, having enough rest, having the tools to manage our stress, having meaningful social connection. So we could go on and on, but like I said, there's only so much time to hit.
And I know we'll talk about that just a little bit tonight. So thank you so much. Thank you everybody for listening. When we have a nice crowd here at this noon talk, and that always reminds us that this is a useful time for people. So I really appreciate your supporting it. And our very last speaker there, also there's a noon talk. So I hope you'll come back. Matt, I know you'll come back. So we'll see you on later tonight. Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate it. Have a good afternoon. Take care.
Thank you.
Be safe.